Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 to 8. Jesus is master of the Sabbath. The number of the word that we're featuring in this video is 4521, Sabbath. And again, we are going to feature the nouns as our Greek grammatical structure, color-coded. Verse 1. And akino, now there is a pronoun that's not a personal pronoun. In that, explicit, that day, in that time, karo, and there is the noun, it's in the dative, eporevthi o Isus tis savasi. Jesus went on the Sabbath through the wheat fields, sporimon in the genitive. The Sabbaths. That word appears 179 times in the Bible, but it only appears first in Exodus 16:23, where God instituted the Sabbath on Mount Sinai. Abraham never observed the Sabbath as far as we know. There was a seventh day of rest, of course, and whether Abraham rested on the seventh day, I'm not sure. I don't think it mentions that. And we that are Christians are not under the Sabbath law that was to the Jews, as we'll see as we go through this section. And it says in Exodus 16:23, and Moses said to them, this word is what the Lord spoke. A Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord, is tomorrow. So we see that it was instituted then by God, and then it was the seventh day because it says at Exodus 16:29, let each sit down in your house by himself. Not one of you go forth from out of his place during the seventh day. Now, Sabbatarians that like to put you on a trip, and they are here or in the United States, and they want you to become Jewish-like. But they're not. They observe the Sabbath on the Saturday, which isn't the true Sabbath, because the true Sabbath has to do with the sun rising and falling in Israel. And then on that day, you're not supposed to go out. But yet these people go to church. So they're disobeying the Sabbath even though they want to put you on a trip. It's really terrible. And then in Exodus 16:23, on the Sabbath, there was no cooking. So you couldn't cook, and then or light a fire for cooking, basically, in Exodus 35:3. Now, I'm not sure about the fire as far as heat, or if it was just for cooking, but it says in Exodus 35:3, you shall not burn a fire in any place of your house on the day of the Sabbaths. I am the Lord. And then in Exodus 20:10, it mentions about not working on the Sabbath, so you can't work. Leviticus 25:4 says, you shall not sow your field and you shall not trim your grapevine on the Sabbath. So no working of the fields and so forth. And then it's to be through your generations, through the generations of the Jews. Leviticus 16:31, it says, and you shall humble your souls, an eternal law. And it's also in Exodus 31:13. So now we see that Jesus is going through the Sabbaths and the wheat fields, Ide mathite avtu, and his disciples in the nominative, epinasan ke irksanto tilin stakias ke esthein, and his disciples hungered and began to pluck ears of wheat and to eat, which is considered to them work. Well, it's really not, but plucking the ears of wheat, the certain Jews came against it, and they are the Pharisees, and a religious sect that believed in the resurrection of the dead and angels, and Paul was part of this religious sect of the Jews, sort of like today's Hasidic Jews. They think they're following God's laws, but they're not, and I will show you why. But they're hypocrites. Jesus calls them out in many places. We'll get into that as we go through the Gospels. It says, the Pharisee idontes, but the Pharisees, seeing the disciples plucking, epon avto, said to him, Idu, imathite su piusin o uk exesti pien in Sabbato. Behold, your disciples in the nominative, they do what, and there's what, is not allowed. The pronoun that's not a proper, the pronoun that's not, Idu e mathite su piusin o uk exesti pien in Sabbato. In the nominative, behold, your disciples do what is not allowed to do in a Sabbath. That is, they're coming against them because they're picking the corn. Now, these people, Pharisees, at this time have developed what's called the oral law, which was begun at the time of the Jews being taken to Babylon, and they no longer had the temple or the priesthood, so they came up with these oral laws, which they wrote down and are basically passed on orally, and they became what's called traditions. And these traditions were later, a couple hundred years after Jesus, put together in a written form called the Mishnah. Now here is a Mishnah. It's Oxford Press, and it's by Danby. The translation, I guess, was originally from Hebrew. And in this book, there is what's called the Shabbat section. And the Shabbat section is 21 pages long, all sorts of sayings of the rabbis that were written down right after the time, during the time of Jesus and a little bit after. Now, what they wrote down in the Mishnah, what the Mishnah mentions about itself, now what Danby's preface mentions about the Mishnah says, approximately the half of the Mishnah has no longer any practical bearing on the present religious practice of Judaism, nor had it any practical bearing even when it was compiled. It was compiled after Jesus. There was no temple, no priesthood, no sacrifices, nothing. So it didn't have any bearing. Same thing today. The Jews that are Hasidic Jews, you see them bobbing around and studying. They're studying the Talmud and different tracts, and they can't do anything because there's no temple and there's no priesthood. Of course, now, there may be here, but that's another story. So basically, when it was written, though, it was after the destruction of the temple, and the Jews were taken throughout the world. So they made up these laws by the rabbis. And then it says, the Mishnah's own account of the origin and history of the oral law is given in the tractate Both 1, which is in there, that's one of the chapters, and at the same time that the written law was given from Sinai. So the oral law, too, was delivered to Moses and handed down orally in turn to the leaders of successive generations. So they're saying that, yes, God wrote the law and Moses wrote the law, but also he orally gave it to him, and that's not been written down. It's passed down through traditions and all this, which is a bunch of baloney. They just invented this because they didn't have anything. They lost it all, and they wanted to control the people. So what's the best thing? To make up another law. And this is what the law is now. Follow what we have to say, and it was just a bunch of hokey stuff, because we'll show you here, and it goes down. And then the preface of Danby's Mishnah says, inevitably the inference follow that the living tradition, that is the oral law, is more important than the written law. Whoa! Since the tradition of the elders, besides claiming an authority and continuity equal to that of the written law, claims also to be its authentic and living interpretation and its essential complement. Now, I haven't read all of the Mishnah, and I don't want to read all of the Mishnah. I don't care what the Jews do. I'm not a Jew, and I'm a Christian, and I follow Jesus Christ, not these people. But this Mishnah, I don't recommend buying it even. I'm just showing you what it has in there. Most of it is just gets into, it's just horrible to mention all the things that they get into. It's just overbearing, as you will show you right here. It says in the Shabbat chapter 1:17 of the Shabbat section, tractate, it says, they may not sell anything to a Gentile or help him to load his beast or raise a burden on his shoulders unless there is time for him, that is a Jew, to reach a place nearby the same day. So they can't help it. So they're making it difficult to do a lot of things. In 1:4:2, it says, the ass may go out with its saddlecloth if this was fastened on before the Sabbath. So they can't put the saddlecloth across the donkey on the Sabbath, but they can do it before the day before and then lead the donkey around, I suppose. And then 1:6:5 says, the rabbi permits a false tooth or a gilded tooth, but the sages forbid it. So some people, you can't even wear your false teeth because that would be carrying something on the Sabbath. And 1:6:8, now these are all places that are in Danby's Mishnah. You can look them up in the table, contents. It says, a cripple may go out with his wooden stump, but Rabbi Josie forbids it. And then 1:10:6, if a man removed his fingernails by means of his nails or his teeth, then you're culpable of breaking the Sabbath. He is culpable that writes 2 letters, so you can't even write. 1:16:8, if a Gentile lighted a lamp, an Israelite may make use of the light, but if he lighted it for the sake of the Israelite, it is forbidden. Well, it goes into stuff like this ad infinitum, and this is what Jesus comes across. He's born, and he comes out, and all these people are going along with all this malarkey, stuff that they've invented. But no, they don't see the Word of God as being God speaking to them. They make their own tradition more important than God speaking to them through the written Word. And we as Christians go to the written Word, as I've really emphasized in many places, that the written Word is God coming into me, as me speaking to you is going through this microphone. The air is coming out of my mouth, it's coming out of my brain, going down to nerves and pushing the air out. At the same time, my lips moving, my tongue's moving, and air is going into a microphone. Microphone's picking it all up, sends it all the way through to my computer. Computer goes up, sends it out to the internet. Internet takes it up, goes all the way through, comes out, goes down into your computer. Computer goes into the audio. You have ear set or microphone speakers. It goes into those, and it comes out. The air goes into your ear, goes up to the nerves, and goes into your brain, and you take me in. Everything I'm saying, you're taking me in. You're taking it in. And this is what God is doing, except it's through the written Word. But no, these people want it to be them. They want you to listen to them, and they're doing the same thing today in Israel. And to me, the Jews today are not even close to the Jews at the time right before Jesus, or even maybe before Nebuchadnezzar, when the temple was there. Before the destruction of the temple, there was still a priesthood and there were sacrifices. And that was the end of what I consider the Jews. Now, you'll say, well, there's Jews today. Well, I don't think they're Jews. I mean, I think that what they are, there would be similar to what, if you thought Sylvester Stallone was a Roman. Well, he's not a Roman, he's an Italian. But the Romans were way different than the Italians are today. The Jews today are way different than the Jews were at the time of the temple. So to me, if somebody says he's a Jew, I say, well, yeah, like Sylvester Stallone's a Roman, and I just leave it with that. If they want to think that they are, that's their business, but that's not mine. I don't have to accept that, and I don't, because they're completely wrong, and they're pushing something that's wrong. Now, the temple and the priesthood come back again. That's a possibility. And now you would say, well, then does that make it valid? Well, I don't think so, because I think what's going to happen then shortly after that, the man of sin will go into that temple proclaiming himself God, and then all the believers in Christ will be taken, and the tribulation will continue on, or start, or however you want to look at the tribulation, pre-trib, post-trib, or pan-trib. Somebody said pan-trib, what's that? And it's all pan. We hope it all pans out. And so they're coming against Jesus and what the disciples are doing, because it's against what they consider the Sabbath. Now, what happens then? It says, O the ipen aftis, then he said to them, Uk anegnote ti epise David, o te epinasen aftos. Did you not read what David did when he hungered? Ke medavtu, and the ones with him? Pos isilthan is ton ikon tu theu, was actually a tabernacle, but ketus artus tis prothesios ephagon, and the breads of the place setting he ate. Us uk exon in avto phagin, which was not allowable to him to eat. Ude tis medavtu, nor to the ones with him, emi tis irevsi monis, except to the priests alone. So what he's talking about here is in 1 Samuel 21:6, where David is fleeing from Saul. Saul is out to kill him, and him and his men leave, and they come to Ahimelech, the priest, where the tabernacle was, asking him for food, and he didn't have anything. It says, and Ahimelech, the priest, gave to him breads of the place setting. And the place setting is right up here, the prothesios. For there was not a bread there, but only breads of the presence, the one being removed before the presence of the Lord, so as to place near the hot breads in which day he took them. So Jesus is showing that if it was to help David to continue with his men, it was okay. And then Jesus continues in 5, and he says, Euk anegnote ento nomo, or did you not read in the nomo, the law, these are the green or the indirect object, and the dative. OTT salvasin e iris en to iro to salvaton veviluse, that in the Sabbaths, the priests, it should be up here, in the temple, profane the Sabbath. Now here you say the temple, you'd think that would be a noun, but it's not. It's an adjective. The holy place, more or less, the holy, like a holy place. So it's a noun substantive. And they profane the Sabbath. How do they do that? It says in Numbers 28:9, and in the day of the Sabbath, God says, you shall lead forward 2 lambs of a year old for a sacrifice offering and its libation. So somebody brings a lamb in and they sacrifice them. So they are profaning the Sabbath by their work, but they are innocent. He says, "Ke aneti isi, aneti isi." Well, that's a hard one for me. Not a. Aneti isi. Aneti isi. Aneti isi. Aneti isi. In verse 6, Lego they emin otitu iaru mizon estin ode. But I say to you that a greater than the temple is here. Whoa, I bet they like to hear that. Whoo-wee! I can imagine these people having a heart attack over what Jesus is saying. He is greater than the temple. And to us Christians, easy, duh. Yeah, Jesus is much greater than the temple. He is at the right hand of the Father and the Godhead, and we will see him when we go to be with him. And then in verse 7, a quotation of Hosea 6:6. He says, "But if you had known what it is, Elion Thelo Keu Thesion, a mercy I want and not sacrifice." He mentions other places that the Sabbath wasn't made for man, but man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. And he wants the right things to happen, not to make it a burden on people, make it harder when it's something that you're doing that's good instead of just the law of the sacrifice. And then he says, "Uk an katadikasate tus ainetius," and if you would have known, you would not have condemned the innocent ones who were the disciples, because they're not accepting Jesus or who he is at all. So they're missing everything. They're just, all they want to do is condemn. And then in verse 8 it says, "Kyrios gar esti tu salvatu o ios tu anthropu." For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Whoa, again, I can see them having a cardiac arrest over this. He's putting himself above the Sabbath. Now, I had master. I don't know why I put master in there, but it's really Lord. And the King James, the New King James have Lord, but the King James has also even, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, but there's no even. And it says the day of the Sabbath, and there is no day in the Greek. So they're inventing words, King James translators, to insert in English that do not appear in the Greek. That's why that's why we're going back to the original Greek and reading it here and seeing what it really says, rather than the translation by somebody that doesn't want you to see. I couldn't say it was on purpose, but they don't let you see what the original words were. It was sort of kept to the clergy. You couldn't, you had a man who may have went to a seminary and he became a priest or a minister in the mainline churches. And in there he took Hebrew and he took Greek. So now he's an expert at all this. And he goes and talks to people and talks to you all and tells you what it's all about. But probably doesn't know much Greek or Hebrew, most of them, probably 95%. So, but they have it behind them in their seminary, becoming a doctor of divinity. And so they can say anything, come up with anything they want. And if you don't see the Greek, because they're just not making it available, or it's not available, then that's fine with them, because they become the expert rather than you. Because if you came up to be the expert and you said, well, the Greek doesn't say that word, how come you're saying that it's saying the day of the Sabbath? There's no word day in there. Well, they would come unglued, because they're used to controlling what is being taught. And here I'm hoping to show that it's not somebody teaching you. God's Holy Spirit will teach you through His Word. It goes through all this, His Word written down, it goes into you, and He will teach you what you need to know. Not what somebody else doesn't have to teach you. Hopefully I don't like to think of myself as teaching you per se. It's more or less how to use God's Word and what the words mean in different places and bringing it together. Using the Word, I don't come up with my own interpretation, more or less. I've interpreted the whole Bible, yes, but all the words that I've picked, everything that you see, every word written down is in a dictionary, and I have a whole bunch of them right behind me here. And I've looked up these words, and sometimes I have maybe 15 dictionaries, and all Greek, and some by Christians, and some by people that have nothing to do with religion, if they're into the classics, Homer and Thucydides and so forth. And you can find out what the words mean. Plus, you can find out what a word means by the context in other places. So by me showing you what these other places show you what this word means, it's not me teaching you. I don't feel like I'm teaching something that's not there, that you can't see it, and bringing all these things out. So I hope you take that in, and I don't want to be a Pharisee and come up with my own ideas of what you should do and how you should go to church and all that. God will lead you to the path that He has planned for you. Next section, Jesus heals the man with the withered hand.